Okay, so I hope the board is clear. Can one confirm you are able to see clearly what's on the board?
I can see, Milton. It looks all right from this side.
Okay, that's fine. So like this top line, you can see the dates that are put here, like where I'm pointing.
Yes, I can. I've
That's
got a
great.
computer screen, so it's big. I can see.
Okay, all right. So we gonna have send a document on Zoom group. That's the document that I'm gonna be referring to most of the things that we are going to try and cover today. So for those who have requested a study on the issue of Israel and Palestine, I've sent a link. I think during the week there was also a study which was done. I think it's in Canada, Whitestone Ministry. They were also discussing the same issue, and it's quite clear that most of the people were not fully like versed with this history. So as the events are unfolding, I think we all agree that it's necessary to get an idea of how we can respond to these events, as we all know that we are in an information warfare. So on the board, I've put a line. I've selected some dates that I think are going to give us a clear picture from where the origin of this war began. And it's quite clear that from the beginning, before the decisions were taken to deal with the issue of Jews, some of the implications we are seeing the world face today were actually foreseen that time. And one thing that is actually quite interesting is that when you look at this issue of resettling a certain group, this is not the first time what has happened to the Jews. I've put this date, 1822. It's another event that I've put there as an example. Um, I'm just gonna go through quickly. That history. It's in around 1820, 22. There was a population of free Black Americans who were actually resettled in Africa under there was a corporation which was set up, a committee which was set up by the American government to assist those groups, that group of people to come back to Africa and resettle. And it just give a picture of how this idea has been like tried before, even though the British had different reasons when they are led in this idea of the Jews coming back to Palestine. Americans had different reasons, but it's kind of a similar example that I've chosen. So the people that were repopulated in 1820 led to the creation of the country that we now know, which is Liberia. So Liberia, it's actually African Americans which were free at that time. They were brought back, and there was quite a backlash for some time from the time they were resettled with the local communities until the time when Liberia was declared an independent country and they were recognized by the world government in the 1860s going forward. You see that quite what is being experienced in Israel and Palestine, even a similar scenario also existed in that time, because it was not like they are being brought in an open space where there's nothing going on there. And I'm not sure how much tension it caused, how it was resolved, even up to today, if the peace of Liberia is now settled without any tensions. But back then, when you go into that history, it had some issues. So it's the only nation that was done in Africa. So looking at that, when you now come to the issue of the Jews in Europe, what is remarkable is that it took almost 2,000 years since the Jews were scattered. By the time you come to the discussion about Jews having a homeland, before you come to 1917 when it was declared, there is this interesting way. I've put 1903 on the board. There was this group of Jews which started a discussion about the possibility of them finding a place where they can call their own, because of the immigration issues in a number of countries in Europe. They were not safe. They were not feeling secure. It was even before the First World War. So one of the groups that was leading that discussion had quite a number of suggestions to where they thought they can actually find a place to resettle. They did not start by considering Palestine. I'm sure they could see the implications of choosing that land. And some of the groups among different Jews in different countries wouldn't want to cause trouble because in the 21st century, the idea of resettling Jews was just going to be an invasion of another country, and they were aware of that. So in 1903, one of the proposals which was so strikingly interesting to me was that they had a list of countries they discussed if they could resettle. One of the suggestions was the Uganda proposal. So I'm just going to go to Wikipedia and read a bit on that. Okay. So this was a sixth Zionist Congress. So there was already a group which, when you come to the modern Israel, when we hear of Judaism and Zionism, one thing we need to note is that Zionism it's a group of Jews who take more of a political stand about their beliefs. So this is one of the active groups that even up to today has been viewed as the right radical group within the Jewish circle, which has taken a sort of a political stand when it comes to the issues of the Jews. So it has been there for quite a while. So in the early 19th century, around 1903, they had a conference where they were regularly meeting. So at this point in history, this was their sixth discussion about the future of the Jews. So I'm just gonna read some few lines. So it says, when Theodor Herzl began his quest to establish a homeland for Jewish people, he sought out support of great powers to help achieve this goal. In 1903, Herzl turned to Great Britain and met Joseph Chamberlain, the British colonial secretary, and other high-ranking officials who agreed in principle to Jewish settlement in East Africa. At the Sixth Zionist Congress at Basel on August 26, 1903, proposed the British Uganda program of a temporal refugee for Jews in Russia. In immediate danger, by a vote 295 to 178, it was decided to send an expedition and investigation commission to examine the territory proposed, and 3 days later, the government of Britain released an official document allocating a Jewish territory in East Africa on conditions which will enable members to observe their national customs. So Uganda was not the only country on the list. They also thought of Angola. They thought of the southern parts of Cyprus. Some were even considering parts of Australia. So they had quite a number of options, but this was one of the proposals which was put on the table. So because the British government had colonized most of these areas, including Palestine, Israel, and parts of Africa, when they started this, before this sixth conference, I think they'd even tried to influence if you go back with this history, before the fall of Ottoman Empire, it was really difficult with the Ottoman leadership for them to even consider getting help in that direction. So during the 19th century, the British were giving them more ear to this suggestion. So this was one of the turning points where the discussion about Jews' homeland was now becoming a reality, because before this history, it was even an issue that some of the Jews were even scared to say it in plain words, because they could understand the implications of the reality of that idea when it's going to be put in practice. Because even among the Jews themselves, when they discuss what is it that we are going to achieve with this idea, how is it going to look like, they could see that, one, if they are to be resettled, they have to get a territory where they get individual rights to rule themselves in that place. They also need to be recognized as a nation. And looking at the map of the world, there's no place which they can refer to their home, which means part of the plan is that they are going to invade a territory. And all the privileges that they are going to get as a people, they are going to be taken away from a certain group. They don't know where is that going to happen. But that reality was among them. So already the Jews were divided. There was one group which was liberal, which was okay with staying in the countries they were in. And they were fighting for their rights to be protected, be it in the constitutions of those countries, be it England, be it Russia. So in the 19th century, before we come to the First World War, most of the countries had not guaranteed the Jews of their citizenship. So they were worried and concerned about that. So this Zionist movement was like the solution is for the Jews to get their own state. So this is one of the proposals which was quite interesting, that they wanted to carve a portion of East Africa and create a state for the Jews. I'm not sure if there's anyone who have got a comment so far before we proceed.
Milton, you're so faint. I don't know if it's our network, or can others hear you?
He is faint because I can't hear him. I was like, I'm gonna listen to the record. I can't hear you.
Even now, you can't hear me? Hello?
Hi, Milton, on our side, you are clear. So I'm not sure if it's other people's network or what, but on our side, you are very clear.
Okay, so some people were hearing me clearly, so which means it might be the issue of network. So, Letwin, can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay. So, from what I was saying, which part were you not hearing? Like,
Ash, I'm sorry, Milton. I think maybe the other thing is that I'm on the road, so there's just too much noise. But then I'm saying, Gucci, you are faint. I was
okay.
just, yeah, and I was really struggling to hear you, but it's fine. I'll get the recording and I'll just don't worry.
Okay, let me just ask for those who heard something like Tsepo, I was clear on your side. Any thoughts?
Oh, sorry, Milton, I didn't hear your last part, but what I was saying is that you were clear on our side all along. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure if, yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's not only you. There are some people who are confirming that I was clear. So maybe for some, it was an issue of network. Let me just recap and then we go forward. So I've given a bit of history with the first waymark that I've put here, which is 1822, where I've discovered or noticed that when we look at what happened with the idea of resettling the Jews, when you go back into this, it's not something new. It's not something that was done for the first time. So one of the examples I've seen is that there was a group of African Americans who were considered free around 1820, which were brought back to Africa. And that led to the creation of a country which we now know today as Liberia. So from that, from the inception of that country, it has been supported by the American government. They set up a committee and brought back people who were willing to be resettled. But the way
Milton,
yes,
we can't hear.
maybe it's network, because some are saying they can hear clearly. I'm not sure. Maybe it's the issue of network on your side. Am I audible now? Deborah? Okay, some people are saying I'm clear. So maybe since there's a recording, we'll see if there's questions after this study, we can check them further, but I'll continue for now. So that group of people was resettled, and there were tensions with the local people in that area, but the plan went ahead anyway. and that led to the creation of the country, which we now know as Liberia. So after
Hello?
this history, yes.
Oh, okay. I think I understand the reason why other people can't hear you. You were sounding far also on us when we started, and then we put it you on amplifier. So I'm sorry. It's true what other people are saying.
Okay.
Because we can hear you clear because we put you on amplifier. So other people can't hear you from their devices.
Okay, let me do this. Let me take off my video. I'll hold my phone and then I'll send the boardwork picture afterwards. Maybe. I'll just send the boardwork afterwards. Maybe if I'm holding it closer, maybe it will be better for everyone. Okay, so, and then we discussed that from this history of the 1820s going forward, there was a group of Jews which were in Europe who were calling themselves Zionist or Zionist movement. And I've given a bit of information that this group, it's the Jews who have taken more of a political stand about the future of the Jews. So when we know of Judaism as a religion, there are some who are not much into politics, but this group is the one that from this history became more active in becoming activists in a political fashion. So there were a couple of meetings that they were having in the 1800s about the future of the Jews, how they were not safe in most of the countries. Their citizenship was not guaranteed, and they didn't know what was going to happen. So around 1903, they had their sixth conference where they met to discuss about the future of the Jews. So they had proposals on how or where can they find a place where they can establish a Jewish nation. On that list, there was a proposal about Uganda. This is marked in 1903 in August 26. They were proposing to bring this issue to the British government. So the British was the one which was now having these countries under its colonial power. Palestine, some of the countries in Africa. So they brought this proposal to the British in 1903 to consider them given a portion in Uganda. So the British government at that time agreed that they would discuss, do investigations. So they sent a group of people to investigate. Part of Uganda was going to be carved and create a space for the Jews to be resettled. And I mentioned that it was not only Uganda they considered, they were also thinking of Angola, parts of Cyprus, parts of Australia. There were a couple of countries that they had put as proposals, but this one was one of the one that they brought to the British government. So when we see these two waymarks, 1820, there are a couple of events that happened between 1820 to 1903, but I just highlighted these two to see that when you look at what the Americans had done in 1820 to resettle some of the Africans in Africa, I'm sure they could see the possibility that it was possible for them to get the same opportunity. But most of the Jews understood the implications of what this was going to cause. And it divided the Jews into two groups. The Jews who were more radical and wanted a long-term permanent solution in their ideology are the ones who were proposing this issue of getting their country back. But some of the Jews were okay with addressing immigration issues in the countries they were in and making sure that they are taken care of just as any other normal citizen. They didn't want to move to another place because they understood that after 2,000 years of being displaced, and they are not even to establish that they are the traces of the Israelites, they could see how that was not practical and realistic. And one of the things they were clear was that if they are to create a new country, they need national rights, they need privileges of a country to be recognized. And what that means in the state of the world in the 1900s is that there's nowhere where they call themselves home. So if they create that state, which means one of the group of people in the world is going to be put on a disadvantage. Their land is going to be taken. They will be treated as citizens. What about the countries who are going to be displaced from that place they are going to take over? So one of the groups among the Jews was not happy with this idea. But this Zionist movement did not stop. So the next waymark, which we're going to discuss now, it's 1917, just after the end of the First World War. We know that there was a Russian Revolution. There are Jews which are there, and all these issues about the immigration safety of the Jews was on top of the agendas. So I'm just gonna read briefly on the second declaration, which was made. This was made by the British government in 1917. So this declaration is named under, there is this British official who was called Lord Balfour. So this Zionist movement at this time, I think they discussed before this matter with other groups. And because Britain was the one which had colonized the land of Palestine together with France, they'd partitioned those portions as their spheres of influence. So of all the world powers that they had tried to get support from, their only hope at this point, it was the British Empire. It is the one which was willing to promise them that they can make something out of their proposal. So Lord Balfour in 1917 is one of the British officials who is going to pen down this declaration in 1917 that Britain was going to support the idea of partitioning Palestine and create a state of Israel. So when this idea is brought onto the table, we know that this was not discussed with the Palestinians themselves are not even a liberated nation. And in this idea, they are not going to be considered. But for the sake of the document to get support, they mentioned that they are going to do something for them, create a state, and also create a state for the native Palestinians. So the promise was that two states are going to be created in this plan. So on that link that I've sent under the Zoom where we joined, I've opened that document which says origins and evolution of Palestine problem. So they mark 1917 as the beginning of this issue. So the question of Palestine was brought before. This was the League of Nations, 1917. This is when the League of Nations had 53, 54 countries, somewhere around there, to try and secure peace in the world. So this idea was brought to the League of Nations. So they are going to call this declaration, the Britain were going to create a document which was going to be presented to the king, and he was going to sign that the king is given mandate, or he has got the authority and the mandate to partition the land of Palestine and create a country for the Jews. So when this idea was put in place, I'm just gonna read, I think this is the 6th paragraph. It says, the Palestine problem quickly widened into a Middle East dispute between Arabs and Israel. So this idea was not welcomed by the Arab world. Remember, Britain had just conquered the Ottoman Empire with other countries from Europe, Germany, Italy, and France. So there is still resistance with the authority of the British Empire to just decide on what they want to do with the future of these countries. Just to check, I'm still audible to everyone? Anyone who can confirm?
I can still hear you from this side, Milton.
Okay.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. So when this declaration is made, the Arab world is not happy, and they did not even consider a dialogue or a discussion with them. So they just took the authority into their own hands and decided this is what they are going to do. So by this time, there is an issue with Jews' safety in Europe, some in Russia. And with this proposal, the Zionist group, which I mentioned before, by the time we come to 1917, some of them started to purchase land under the British Empire in Palestine. So they could purchase a piece of land, settle. Another guy from another area comes, purchase a piece of land, until there is quite a significant population adding on the local native Jews, which was understood to be there even after all these nations that have scattered Israel. History says that there was a couple of Jews which were staying together with Palestinians in the 19th century, who were still, in terms of religion, were still maybe observing their Judaism religion, but they were living under this environment where they're under the control of, before the British come, it was under the Ottoman Empire, but it was now the Islamic world which was dominant in that area. So they were quite a minority. So, but after this history, more Jews were now purchasing land and trying to move back to Palestine. So after the events of the First World War, there was a real threat with the issue of the Jews. The Russian Revolution, it was another turning point. So we know what happened from 1917, we go to 1939, the tensions in Europe escalated, the Second World War and the Holocaust happened. So the next waymark I've put on the board, it was 1945. So this declaration of 1917, it was not acted upon. The British declared this, and they could see the negative response it was receiving. They did not act upon it, but the Zionist movement had hope and they kept on pushing. So with all these events that occurred, of all the proposals that they had, it was now becoming a real issue in their mind that Palestine might be the place where they want to consider. So 1945, we know that the end of the Second World War, the League of Nations is gonna be transformed into United Nations. So if you can notice that the British have not yet solved the problem which they have started. And now we've got United States in 1945 getting involved. Under the president, Henry Truman, is gonna issue a statement requesting the British government to admit a number of 100,000 Jewish refugees in Europe into Palestine. And that plan was actually approved by the United States House of Assembly in 1946. So they proposed this to the British government and promised that they will also assist in this. So we now have two world powerful nations saying that this is the plan we can do with the Jews. So when they approve this idea, and this number is gonna be sent to Palestine, it actually escalated the tension. So this will lead us to the war that is gonna occur in 1947 between the Arab world and the Jews. And what they were trying to avoid was not to involve or to create another war between Europe and the whole region of the Middle East. Because when you look at how these countries were conquered by Britain, they were not happy with this colonial agreement. And for the Europeans to create a state in the Middle East, which is totally against their religion, and we know that they were understanding that the influence of the Europeans in establishing this state is that there was an interest to reestablish the Christian influence in the Middle East. And we've got Judaism, which is gonna be given more power in that region. So coming from the colonial powers, the whole Arab world united behind Palestine. So there are 5 countries which are in the region: Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and even I think it's Syria and Iran. They supported Palestine. So those countries came together to fight with the Jews. And we know the history of the 6-day war, which occurred in 1947. So that war Unfortunately for the Jews, they were given support by the Americans and the British, and they managed to win that war. So that group of the Middle East countries did not have the power to actually overcome the Jews. So this idea, that's when it was actually abandoned. And in 1948, May 14, Israel was actually created. And they divided it, or the portion, into three parts, which was Palestine. So the state of Israel on one side, West Bank on the side of Jordan, and then Gaza Strip. So that war which occurred with the Arab world, it actually displaced more than 750,000 Palestinians were displaced. And the United Nations, soon after this, they declared Israel an independent nation. Nothing was done with Palestine. So the borderlines were still a very sensitive issue. So the United Nations took it in its own hands that they will monitor the borderlines which are going to separate the Palestinians and the Jews. So they said parts of, let's say, Jerusalem, it's going to belong to United Nations, because they understood that the Christians will still want access to the holy sites. The Jews want access to the same sites. And when you understand that for 2,000 years, when the Jews are not around, also there is a history which the Islam world, part of the Jewish heritage, even the Old Testament, the story of Abraham, they believe, and they've got their own writings in a different way. They also believe in the same patriarchs like Abraham and all these patriarchs. So they'd also raised one of their holy sites. There is a mosque which is in Israel, which is in Palestine. It is the third when you compare with Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. So it's one of the three places which both the Islamic world and the Western powers knew that it was going to cause more tension in future. But with all these challenges foreseen, the plan still went ahead. So the United Nations said they are going to control some of the areas. They will remain neutral. Both sides cannot claim those areas. So from 1948, there's going to be tensions between these two countries. But from 1948, Israel has got all the support from Britain, United States, and other countries in Europe. And a lot of resources are going to be given to the Jews militarily. And Palestinians, nothing has been done to them. So around 1960, the Arab world had a series of discussions, and they were also pushing for the independence, or for Palestine to be declared an independent country. But Palestine did not have power to actually have access to actually like build institutions that can protect its own citizens and maintain peace and order in those territories, because the Jews from this time point, 1948 going forward, kept on crossing the boundaries which United Nations had set, putting their settlers across the places which Palestinians are. So when United Nations prolonged with this idea of coming up with a resolution that effectively put where Jews have to end, the more they prolonged that idea, because it was not easy to establish that through the the rule of law, or the law which in the United Nations Charter, they had to justify how did they manage to establish Israel and take the rights of Palestinians away. So they are still not decided on what to do, and developments keeps on happening. The Jews are overlapping the boundaries, and this idea of separating these states into two countries, more and more it becomes impossible. So in 1987, I'm gonna send the board work. I just chose to put the history of the beginning of this group, which Israel is now fighting with today, Hamas. So Hamas, it's a group which is gonna be created within the support of certain Arab nations. One of them, it was Egypt. So that's when the ground force was actually given support to mobilize and plan. So we have done studies in the past on how to understand Islam as well. And we know that there are two groups within the Islamic world, the Shia and the Sunni Muslims. So when you look at the ideologies of those two groups in the Muslim world, Hamas falls under this radical group, which believes that they have the right to raise under the leadership of a caliphate, an Islamic state which is free of pollution. And when they mean pollution, which means without interference of any external powers, they have to recreate an Islamic world where things go according to their order. So this group was given support in Egypt and also from Iran. So it was called the first intifada, or an uprising. So I've just put it. It's under this waymark, 1987. So this group, it's gonna be the military force that is hoping to go head to head with the Jewish state and claim their land back. So when Israel is partitioned in 3 blocks in 1948, which is West Bank and Gaza Strip, these are the 2 areas where most of the Palestinians are concentrated on. The government which was organized for Palestine is called PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. So this is the government which we know one of their famous leaders, Yasser Arafat. Within the Islamic world, he falls under the, I will just give this as an example, under the liberal group, which believed that it's actually okay for them to tolerate that their land was carved and 2 states are going to be created. They were okay with that idea. So this group of Palestinians didn't want a continuous war. They could see that it was becoming impossible to think that the Jews are gonna go away anytime soon. So some Palestinians were okay to want to work with the idea that the United Nations, if it fulfills its promise, they can form a government that can work with the partitions which the United Nations were monitoring. So Hamas, from its inception, did not agree with this idea. And this was a militia group which was operating outside Palestine. So from the Jewish perspective, they are viewed as a terrorist group that is trying to come and destabilize the state of Israel. So this is why this ideology that Hamas is a terrorist group, they've been alienated right from the beginning, and they are not under the structures of the government of Palestine, which was now established around the 60s, which was the PLO. So this group has been a force which was trying to fight against this idea of a nation of Israel. So from 1987, they fought. There were several conflicts which happened with the Jews. Sometimes they raid, kill Jews. In the history, we have seen most of the reports showing that in the past there have been back and forth attacks, Jews attacking Hamas, Hamas attacking Israel, even killing civilians. It has been happening for a very long time. So one thing that the Jews did, they did not pay much attention to this group when it was created. So at one point, they were willing to work with them as part of a group that is recognized in the affairs of Palestine. But when it comes to ideologies now, the Jewish nation is also divided into two groups, as we have mentioned. We have got this Zionist group, which are more radical, who were now seeing a possibility that actually the whole Palestine belongs to the Jews. So with this uprising caused by Hamas and this resistance, as that name Hamas represents an uprising or a resistance, they were now justifying that they can actually push away all Palestinians because Jews are not going to live in peace when Palestinians are just in their territory. So you can see that the problem that the British created is becoming more complex, and it's becoming more difficult to come up with a solution. So there have been a series of war from 1987. When you come to around 2005, 2006, actually Hamas went to election competing with the other ruling party, and they won a lot of seats in the Palestinian government. So when they became the main party, with now the conflict of these ideologies, that Hamas, it's a group that represents a people who are not willing to compromise and allow the Jews to settle. They were saying if they are to get power and the resources, Jews need to be removed from their land. And this continues to inflame the fear of the Jews that the radical group of the Zionist movement is also saying, for us to live in peace in this land, which they are now feeling comfortable that it is theirs, all the Palestinians have to move away. So this tension has never ended. And the world, even when world leaders sit down and try to come up with a solution, the reality is that what they saw before 1917 has become something more complex, that for them to come up with a solution even now, you can see with the discussions that are going on, it's not very easy for them to come up with a straight solution to solve the problem. So to those who are in this movement, who were caught unprepared in relation to the events that were occurring in all these histories, and this event is just happening in our eyes, and we have to understand that it's all part of events that are occurring. When you look at our reform line, these are events that are occurring in the history of the agitation of the Sunday Law. So I've put here if you see, sorry about that. I've put the reform line of the priest, 1989, 2001, 2014, 2019. So we are here, we have passed 2021. We are in this history. So we all understand that everything that is occurring here, it's part of the agitation of the Sunday law, internally, externally. So the reason of this study, or part of the effort to present this study, was not to come up with a side and say, this is the right side, this is the wrong side, and we are supposed to be standing with this group because this side is on the wrong side. You can actually see that all through this history, that decision became messed up, that when you look at the victims of Holocaust, which are the Jews, as they left Europe, all the efforts that have been made in the world to make sure the Jews are safe. We know the idea of anti-Semitism, which has been preached among the democratic circles, and it has been made a symbol of showing solidarity to equality, that a hatred against the Jews, it's something that is wrong. It shows how evil that idea of oppressing one group can be. That very same group, they've been given a land without clear justification or a legal standing on how they propose and declare that idea. So it's clear that when you see all these issues, what the Western powers, or the basis on which they support this idea, it's the religious influence. And on both sides, when you go to the Islamic world, at the core center of this argument, it's the belief system of both sides, which makes it very difficult for the two groups to actually see things from eye to eye. So when you look now at us as priests, how are we supposed to respond to this issue? You can actually see that we have been prepared before this event occurred. When Elder Tess was doing her studies on the Vespasses, one of the studies that she took so much time to which was a very, I can say, a turning point in this movement, is when we identified that when it comes to our worldview, we were on the wrong side. And that was established clearly with the worldview of the right wing and the left wing. And part of the requirement or the preparation of us to completely fulfill our duty, our role, was we were required to move from the right wing to the left wing. And the steps which were taken in establishing us to understand that concept, they were progressive. That was difficult when the message came, but shifting from the right to the left, it looked simple in our eyes, but God had to take a step further. And we understood that it's not all that the left represents that we are agreeing with. And there was a call for us to actually sift the information, even when we are on the left wing. As we review those series of Vespers, we saw that actually there is a ditch on both ends. On the right wing, there's a danger of the far right. On the left wing, there is a danger of far left extremism. And the subject of Israel was not discussed entirely from the perspective of the two sides in conflict. But there was a study which Elder Paminda did, highlighting how the far left has been concerned with how the left wing single out Israel when it comes to governments which are led under dictatorial leaders. Of all the, I can say, interventions which America has done with its allies, they have not challenged Israel as a power that is going against principles of humanity. And that was a hint or just a sign which was showing us that in future we're going to be dealing with this issue in a more serious manner. So there's a document which was actually shared, which highlighted that what could it be that causes the left to be tolerant with Israel when it comes to the way they are treating Palestinians as compared to other nations like Syria, like Iraq, Afghanistan. They take a different stand when it comes to those countries. But when it comes to the Jews, they respond in a different way. So we had already been prepared to understand that our history was forcing us to understand that the way we had understood prophecy from 1989, we have to shift from seeing things from a simple model to a complex one. And I think this is one of the histories where we are now seeing that we are living in a complex or in a world that complex events are occurring. For us to understand where to stand on, you have to be grounded on the principles of what you believe. So we also understand that there is another history which had happened in this line of the priests. And I will take us to the message that actually formalized the Midnight Cry message in 2021. It was the issue of Afghanistan. We had to look at the consequences of how the war was started 20 years back in the 90s. And it was not only the involvement of the superpowers, but we even went further to see how part of the groups which were now problematic, like the Taliban, when those groups were actually formed, America was involved in trying to deal with part of the end of the fall of USSR. They were creating militia groups on the ground which were to put pressure and fighting against Russia in the late 90s, 89, 90. So those groups, when USSR fell, they were left unmonitored. And these groups had arms, and these are the groups which were disgruntled with the way they were not actually given any role after they were used to participate in the proxy war with Russia. So those groups became the issue now when Americans are now trying to deal with the issue of Afghanistan. They are actually involved in the root creation of that problem. So we have seen the same thing with this issue of Israel and Palestine. At the roots of it, the British Empire assumed with its imperial authority that they have got the right to create a state out of nothing without following the international law, without even considering the other side involved in this issue that they see necessary. So when we come now to the 21st century, these issues are complex to deal with. It's not that easy to just come to a decision or an answer on which side to stand on. But with the example of Afghanistan, our issue was not to choose between the United States and the Afghanistan government who is right, who is wrong. Even when they left Afghanistan, because of the test which is in our dispensation, which is gender inequality, what we had been moved away from was to put everything in one box when it comes to how we view the world. For example, when 9/11 occurred, I'm just going to give an example. When 9/11 occurred, according to the way media portrayed or responded to that issue, we know that the US government responded by putting all the people from the Islam world in one box. And part of the response was the creation of a law that gave the United States power to actually respond to this issue. And we know when the Patriot Act was created, in as much as it was necessary to arm the state with executive powers to respond in other decisions, also part of the problem with that was there was a targeted group which they were responding to. And whilst we were conservative, we were viewing Islam as the enemy. And on top of that, with our wrong view of prophecy, we had marked Islam as a group that is gonna spark the events that leads to the Sunday Law by striking the United States. And we had not done a proper research to establish that we can put the whole Islamic world in one group. So you can imagine, whilst we are responding to 9/11 in our conservative mindset, we have never cared or thought about Palestine as a people, because they fall in this box. In our minds, they must be the problem. So it's not surprising that many people, when this event is now happening, the assumption is that the Jews must be on the right side. There must be something wrong with the Islamic nation, which is Palestine. But with the pressure now coming from those who are standing up for human rights, it's becoming difficult to see who is, because there's some truth on the concerns from both sides. When you look at how the Jews are fearful of the ideology of Hamas, of not willing for two-part state resolution, they have also by the idea that they can actually, in response, just stand for the same thing, like wipe away all the Palestinians. But when you look now at the core of this issue, the root cause, when the imperial powers created this problem, actually you can trace that from the beginning. There was lip service to the issue of human rights. Human rights are applied to a group that one superpower believes they deserve. If a group does not feel in their category of a favored nation, they don't apply those rules. We've seen how the League of Nations is established in 1917. It's a group that stands up for peace, to stand up for everyone, but they just didn't tell the truth about Palestine. They didn't make enough effort to establish a neutral position that leaves both nations happy. So after Britain led in that idea, they were joined by the Americans, and you can see ever since that their response to this issue did not consider the human rights aspect of the Palestinians. The Palestinians have been suffering for so long, but with just one event, with a loss on the Jewish side, it's being blown out of proportion to now like make it a point that Palestinians, the Jews are not safe. Hamas is put in a box with all the civilians that are not part of the problem. And for our own interest, for those who can even try to go deeper into understanding the current state of Palestine at present, you can actually see that a lot has gone wrong in that history. And it has now become more difficult to bring solution. when those partitions were made, in the last 20 years, the Jews actually went ahead to build a wall to divide Palestine and Israel. They didn't want Palestinians to come and work on the Jewish territories. They've built a wall. In some cities like Hebron, they have put surveillance cameras that when Palestinians are entering into certain gates, they are even using advanced technology like facial recognition. All their information, their data is put right in there. When it comes to crime, they are even categorized in different groups. Those who are of high risk, they are put in a certain color. So when they are being scanned, even in those gates, they have got information about each individual. So there's Palestinians, some of reporters are even saying they are just like people in an open prison in their homes. They are just good as people who are actually in a prison. They are not free. Palestine have failed to come up with even a standing army that can protect its own citizens. Hamas, it's a militia group which comes in and out. So the force on the ground is the British, it's the Jewish army and the Jewish police. So you can imagine, I even checked the number of the police force of Iran, a country which has got 4 or close to 5 million people. They have got 10,000 police members and very few police stations around the country. You can imagine the fate of human rights to women and children in Palestine. Can they even go and report abuse to the Jewish police? Because it's clear that Palestinian police cannot even effectively respond to the humanitarian issue of Palestinians. Worse than that, Jews which are buying land in the Palestinian territories are even given protection by now the Jewish government. So they've got soldiers on their back to check and protect them within the territories of Palestine. So Palestine as a country, they've been squashed and cornered in a way that that country, ever since, it's not actually developing or growing. There are few institutions which were established in the past, universities, but when you look at a modern progressive world which is advancing in technology, in infrastructure, currently the Palestinians are stuck. They are in this box where they are not safe even just to go out of their homes. And they cannot even cross over to the Israeli side. I looked at the city which was built, which used to be the capital city of Israel before they take parts of Jerusalem after Trump waived or gave the Jews the right to actually declare Jerusalem to be the capital city of Israel. Now, there's this city called Tel Aviv. It has got the old side of it, but when you go to the new part, which was built in the 21st century, Israel is quite a lot of investment happening. Money is coming from United States directly. One of the reporters was mentioning that per year, Israel is receiving close to 42 million per year. And when they try to even check a rate of how much they can be getting, let's say per daily basis, close to, it's a lot of money they are getting just to make sure that economy is now like stable and they've got enough power to resist the Palestinian and the Arab world as a threat. So with our idea now of how equality works, we know that the principle that we now operate on is that when the two issues, which are freedom and equality, clashes, as we have seen with the interest of the Jews and the interest of Palestinians on both sides, freedom and equality are actually at loggerheads. And we had to understand that we have to prioritize equality over freedom. And when you look at this war, what is it that has been prioritized? Are the Western powers prioritizing equality or freedom for the Jews? So I'm just going to leave it there as a question for each and every one of us to answer for themselves if we really understand these principles and how we can respond to this issue of Palestine and Israel. I don't know if there's anyone with contribution questions. You are welcome.
I wanted to liken this to the whole issue of gender equality that we are dealing with. If you have a woman that has been suffering abuse at the hands of a man for years and years and years, the one time that she's able to stand up for herself, she can be accused of being disrespectful. She can be accused of being the one that is destroying the marriage and the relationship. But she's actually just acting out of the need to just be her own individual, and her humanity, which has been taken away from her. She's just trying to recover it or to claim it. But in many of these instances, the women are blamed for not being pro-marriage and protecting their marriages and relationships and husbands. And I think that is what is happening to Palestine. Palestine has been so abused. And you know what? This woman, maybe she might use some really bad methodologies. You know. Put your speaker in. It's causing an echo. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, so if this woman were to wake up one day and attack her husband, she might end up in jail or and accused of some crime. The families might turn against her.
Elder D.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know if
You are now muted.
Yes, I was muted. Okay, sorry about that. There was a call coming in and it disrupted. So I was trying to use the whole analogy of a marriage and an abusive relationship to help us clearly see what is happening between the Jews and Israel. Actually, I have 2 points to make. And that's the first one. The first one, I think, is just to look at an abusive relationship and see that, yes, what this woman will end up doing will technically be a wrong thing, but we have to look at what motivates her to act that way. What has motivated her is years and years and years of abuse. But as in many instances, when such things happen and women are blamed, and the woman is blamed for destroying the relationship and the marriage and not thinking about her children and being cruel in her thoughts and all of that, is because, you know, favor is always, as you're saying, the question is whether we are uplifting equality or freedom. And this woman is expected to compromise herself for the sake of this man and the family and everything, and swallow all the abuses that are coming upon her. So this is what has happened to Palestine. Yes, what they did is wrong. When you go back into the history, you can see that it's all a reaction to all the years and years and years of abuse. which brings me to my second point. It's quite ironic that when you look up on web pages about Jews, Judaism and Jewish, to be Jew, what it means to be Jew, they themselves claim that it is not a race. In fact, to call it a race is to be anti-Semitic. So they say to be a Jew is to believe in the religion. It's a religious thing. It's like being an Adventist. And what the Jews have, what the nation of Israel has done is literally like, you go all over the world, bring all the Adventists, decide to create a country for Adventists and call it whatever you want to call it. Go find a space and displace some people and then resettle all your Adventists who come from all the races in the world, all the nations. Judaism is like that. It's not a race, it's not a country, it's not a tribe, it's a religion. And that's why you have people of all manners of color who call themselves Jews, from black to white and all the in-betweens. And so they claim to be a religion, but they act as if they are a tribe, as if they are a nation, as if they are a race. Because when they are going to displace other people from their land to resettle as a country, they are no longer a religion. Now, that's not a religion. That is a country. That is a race. So they are even confused about who they are themselves and how they relate with the rest of the world, not to mention all the injustices that you have spoken about already. So I think the Lord just in time gave us this message so that we can have clarity when it comes to such events and be able to recognize that equality here is the real story here. It's the real deal here. Whereas the Jews are expecting to be treated as equals with others, they come and oppress others. You know, God does not set us free, and then now we become the oppressors of others. Otherwise, thank you so much for the history and the clarity we are getting from it.
Thank you for that input. Anyone to add or questions where they do not understand? So just to add on what Elder D is showing, we have not even gone into how this has become even a weapon with the information war. I think I've sent one of the short clips where Trump is even capitalizing on this issue, weaponizing his message to show that the left is weak under Biden. They can't deal with issues. More wars actually occurring under Obama. Is under the left, be it Obama, be it Biden. And he even go as far as saying, under my presidency, not even one war started. And if I'm to come back, I'll finish all the wars that are which are currently happening, which is Ukraine, and even claiming that he can solve this one. So with him saying Biden cannot do something that is right, if you look at the options with that statement, what is it that Biden can do right? Right now, America has failed to even call out Israel that this is a crime against humanity. When you look at the proportion of the response which Hamas launched as a militia group, which when you go back to history, 2006, Hamas actually won elections. Jews were involved in making sure that the government of Hamas is not going to be effective in Palestine. And they made sure that it created more division and favored the West Bank government, which had the PLO, and they disenfranchised Hamas. That is why now Hamas was now focusing on Gaza as a strategic point where they have got access to the Mediterranean, they can receive or bring in whatever support they need to deal with Israel. Because West Bank is now like central, it's now put in the middle with Jewish security. Citizens in Gaza cannot go to West Bank without passing through Israeli military checkpoints. So all this systematic oppression, you look at what the Germans did, the Nazi government did to the Jews. They just came up with concentration camps. Jews did not create concentration camps. They've just allowed Palestinians to be hostages in their own homes. And this whole idea of creating two states with what is now visible on the ground, even when you look at the map, just go on YouTube, search a video about a tour in Palestine or a tour in Israel. You'll see how Israel overlaps in the Palestinian territory, which is underdeveloped. They don't have roads. Most of their cities are those concentrated cities with flats where most people are put in one block. You look at how when Hamas, when Jews were now trying to deal with Hamas, we saw how they were collapsing those tall buildings. They were saying Gaza is the most concentrated location in the world. 2 million people put in a small corner, and the habitation style itself, it's just like a concentration camp. So you can actually see that the way the world is even responding, United Nations and the Security Council, Argentina, is it Argentina or Brazil, wrote a proposal to respond to this Israeli-Palestine issue. Because of trying to be neutral, they did not set out clear terms on how this response can work out. Russia, because they are part of the Security Council, took that document, edited it, and said, why are you not saying that let's stop the war? We need to call for a ceasefire. So Russia edited the document. When it was now presented to the Security Council, Americans refused just because Russia gets involved. Not that what Russia is saying is wrong. Americans, even us, can agree that right now, that's what everyone is calling for. All journalists who are on the right side of the issue are saying, at least someone should say something to the Jews that they are doing wrong. It has been for so long without them being called out. But Americans, because of their own interest and not wanting to compromise their position, just because Russia is involved, the document is discarded in a crisis. Right now, they are pushing for aid to go into Palestine. Palestinians don't want aid. They are saying, we just want to be free. We just want a right for self-determination. It's not about aid. So they are trying to get credit for pushing in trucks of food and clothing. And it's a shame when you look at the kind of respect they are expecting or recognition with such action, with such an issue that even someone who is not in politics can actually see that who is on the right side, who is on the wrong side. So yeah, it's such a war that has, I think, opened our eyes more to how all the problems that even countries in Africa are facing, countries in Asia, even some of the countries in Europe which were colonized are facing, if you trace them back, they link to how the colonial powers could create problems and leave them. Like I just looked at 1917 Balfour Declaration. It was just one individual making such a far-reaching consequent decision without even considering the other side. The Palestinians were not even put in the discussion of this plan to divide the states. And all of a sudden, it became reality. And they saw that the territories are now difficult to rule, and they quit, they leave them like that. So you can actually trace the current state of the world, the inequality of the stronger nations and the weak. It's all rooted in how in the past things were conducted. I'm not sure there's a mic on, someone wants Hello? Okay, I thought someone wanted to comment or say something. So if there's no comments or additions, I hope this study makes it clear, especially the background of where this war comes from. And it might be a bit easier now to look at how the world is responding today and be able to see that how are we supposed to view this event as it is unfolding. So if there are no other comments, we can close in prayer. Let us pray. Dear God who art in heaven, we thank you for your grace and your mercy. We thank you for your love as we are learning and seeing that the three tests that you have revealed unto us through the midnight cry, which is race, worship, and sexism. Most of the things that we thought we know, even in the past, it's now becoming clear that these are the tests which have tested great nations. This is the basis upon which many kingdoms and empires have falling short of the wisdom to see that your kingdom and the wish of the devil, this is where the drawing line is drawn in the sand. We thank you, Lord, for giving us methodology and the tools that we can be able to use, as we know that more complex issues are going to unfold in future. May we continue to follow the steps and use the information that you've given us to walk in this path that is narrow. And we pray that those victims that are suffering in the world because of inequality, we are required to be sympathetic and empathetic from that basis without putting everyone in the box of religion. If it was not by God's grace, we could have used our religious background as a justification that those who are suffering are meant to suffer. But now we have opened our eyes, and may this pain that the world is going through give us a clear picture of how we can wish for a different kingdom, and that we can make a difference when it comes to victims around us. This is our humble prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I'm not sure the Zoom group organizers, the teachers who are in charge of the Zoom are not here. I'm not sure if tomorrow there is studies or we are going to follow the camp that Elder Paminda is having. I'll find out, and then they will confirm on the Zoom platform if there are studies tomorrow or not. I hope that everyone will have a blessed Sabbath. Thank you for joining.